71 million animals. Let that number settle for a moment. 71 million cattle, sheep, goats, and livestock grazing across the dry scrubland of Burkina Faso, one of the largest national herds in all of West Africa. And yet for decades, this country was spending $50 million every single year importing powdered milk from European factories. $50 million to feed children in a country that owns 71 million animals. That is not a farming problem. That is not a climate problem. That is not even a poverty problem. That is a sovereignty problem. And in early 2025, Captain Ibrahim Traoré solved it in a way that nobody predicted. He flew in 710 pregnant cows from Brazil, not from France, not from the Netherlands, not from any of the traditional European agricultural partners that African governments have historically depended on. From Brazil, tropical genetics, heat-resistant, high-yield, perfectly engineered by nature for exactly the kind of climate that the Sahel throws at livestock every single day. And what happened next is changing the entire protein economy of Burkina Faso. Welcome. This is Arisen Now. To understand why 710 cows matter so much, you first need to understand the paradox that Burkina Faso has been living with for generations. The country sits in the Sahel, the vast semi-arid belt stretching across Africa just south of the Sahara. This is traditionally pastoralist territory. For centuries, the Fulani, the Mossi, the Tuareg, and dozens of other ethnic communities built their entire civilizations around livestock. Cattle were currency. Cattle were status. Cattle were survival. By any measure, Burkina Faso should be a dairy powerhouse. 71 million animals. The herds stretch for kilometers across the scrubland. You can see them in satellite imagery. Massive dark clouds of moving bodies rippling across the landscape. And yet, historically, Burkina Faso was processing just 2% of its raw milk. 2%. The other 98% was either consumed immediately at the point of production, drunk warm straight from the animal, or it's spoiled, because there was no refrigeration infrastructure to get it from the village to the town, no processing plants to turn it into storable products, no cold chain logistics to move it across the country before it became unusable. So what did Burkina Faso do? The same thing the old system always told African governments to do. They imported 70 million liters of powdered milk every single year, reconstituted from European factory powder and sold to Burkinabè families as a substitute for the fresh milk that was literally dying on their own land, 50 kilometers away. $50 million per year, leaving the country, while 71 million animals grazed and produced and spoiled with nobody capturing the value. This is what Traoré inherited, and this is what he refused to accept. The response had a name: Faso Kosam. In the local Moray language, the milk of the fatherland. A state-owned dairy enterprise launched with 100 million CFA francs in initial capital investment, and a mandate that was simple and total: stop the bleeding. But Traoré understood something that previous governments had consistently gotten wrong. You cannot solve a decentralized problem with a centralized solution. Burkina Faso's dairy regions are spread across the country, from the Sahel zone in the north, to the Boucle du Mohun in the west, to the eastern provinces. Building one giant mega factory in the capital would not reach the milk. The milk was in the villages, so he brought the factory to the milk. Instead of one vulnerable processing plant, Faso Kosam built a decentralized network of high-tech processing hubs placed directly inside the major dairy basins: the Fada Namgorma facility, the Dedougou hub, the Kaya processing center, each one scaled to serve its surrounding pastoral community, each one capable of processing thousands of liters daily, each one with cold storage, pasteurization equipment, and packaging lines. The Fada Namgorma facility alone is scaled to process 3,000 liters of milk every single day. And for the first time, the milk that used to spoil in the heat before anyone could capture its value was being collected, chilled, processed, and sent to market as branded Faso Kosam product. Burkinabè milk, in Burkinabè packaging, from Burkinabè animals, processed in Burkinabè facilities. But there was still one problem, and it was a problem that no processing plant in the world could solve on its own. Processing capacity is only useful if you have enough milk to process. And this is where Burkina Faso ran into a wall that the Faso Kosam network alone could not break. The local cattle breeds, the Zebu Pulsudanate, the Azawak, the Borgu, are extraordinary animals in many respects. They are heat-resistant. They survive on minimal water. They can walk enormous distances without losing body condition. They have evolved over thousands of years specifically for the punishing conditions of the Sahel, but they were not bred for dairy production. A local Burkinabè cow in traditional management produces between 1 and 3 liters of milk per day. Compare that to a specialized European Holstein dairy breed producing 30 to 40 liters per day under ideal conditions. The gap is enormous, and this gap was the hidden ceiling on everything Faso Kosam was trying to build. You could have the most sophisticated processing network in West Africa. You could have the cold chain, the packaging, the distribution trucks, the branded bottles, but if each cow was only giving you 2 liters a day, the economics would never work at the scale needed to replace $50 million worth of imported European powder. Traoré's agricultural team understood this precisely, and the solution they chose revealed something important about how this government thinks. They did not go to France. They did not go to the Netherlands. They did not go to Germany, the countries that African governments have historically looked to for agricultural expertise and breeding stock. They went to Brazil. Why Brazil? The answer is rooted in biology and climate science. Brazil is the world's largest exporter of beef. It manages one of the largest commercial cattle herds on the planet. And critically, Brazil's climate in its northern and central regions is not European. It is tropical, hot, humid, challenging, demanding on animals in ways that resemble the Sahel far more than the green pastures of Normandy or the Dutch lowlands. Over decades of intensive livestock breeding, Brazilian agricultural science developed cattle genetics that could do something European breeds cannot: produce high volumes of milk while tolerating tropical heat. The Girolando breed, a cross between the heat-resistant Gir Zebu and the high-producing Holstein, became Brazil's dairy revolution. Animals that give 15 to 20 liters of milk per day, even in 35-degree heat. Animals that can thrive without the temperature-controlled barns that European high-yield breeds require. Animals, in other words, that could actually survive and produce in Burkina Faso. In early 2025, Traoré executed the transfer. 710 high-performance pregnant cows arrived from Brazil, specifically selected for their heat tolerance and milk yield profile. They were delivered to the Lumbila breeding station near Ouagadougou, a facility now operating as the genetic hub of Burkina Faso's dairy revolution. The logic was deliberate and long-term. These were not just dairy cows. They were pregnant, meaning that their calves born on Burkinabè soil, raised on Burkinabè pasture, adapted from birth to Burkinabè conditions, would carry those Brazilian genetics into the local herd permanently. Cross them with local Burkinabè breeds, and you begin to build an entirely new generation of cattle. Heat-resistant like the local breeds, high-yielding like the Brazilian lines, a sovereign genetic resource, owned by the Burkinabè state, multiplying on Burkinabè land. The Brazilian genetics now flowing through the Faso Kosam processing network are injecting over 1.2 million liters of high-quality fresh milk into the Burkinabè supply chain annually. 1.2 million liters, from animals that did not exist on Burkinabè soil 18 months ago. Burkinabè children who were drinking reconstituted European powder are now drinking fresh local milk, and the processing network is ready to absorb every liter they produce. But here is what makes this story truly different from standard agricultural development projects. It is not just about the milk, it is about the model. Traoré bypassed the traditional European agricultural partnership entirely. He did not apply for a French agricultural development grant. He did not request Dutch dairy expertise through an IMF-linked technical assistance program. He identified the biological problem. Local breeds produce too little milk for tropical conditions. He identified the solution: Brazilian tropical genetics that combine heat tolerance with dairy yield. He executed the transfer with Burkina Faso's own resources, and he built the processing infrastructure domestically to capture the value at every stage of the chain. The milk stays in Burkina Faso. The processing stays in Burkina Faso. The jobs stay in Burkina Faso. The revenue stays in Burkina Faso. This is what food sovereignty looks like in protein form. But the Brazilian cattle story is only half of the protein revolution happening in this country right now. Because while the cows were landing from Brazil, something equally dramatic was happening in the poultry sector. Before October 2025, Burkina Faso was importing day-old broiler chicks from France and Belgium every single year, a dependency costing over $1 million annually. The local breed, the Poulet Faso, tough and resilient, took a grueling 24 weeks to reach just 1 kilogram of body weight. In commercial poultry farming, time is money. 24 weeks to 1 kilogram means high feed costs, long production cycles, and economics that make it nearly impossible to compete with imported frozen chicken arriving from industrialized foreign farms. Traoré issued a total ban on foreign broiler chick imports in October 20. Complete, no exceptions. And the ban forced the market to do what bans, when correctly applied, are designed to do. Adapt or die. Burkinabè agricultural science delivered the answer. The Poulet Faso. A new hybrid breed created by crossbreeding a selected local male line with highly productive females. The result? An animal engineered entirely within Burkina Faso that reaches 1.1 kilograms in just 10 weeks, less than half the time of the old local breed, while hens produce up to 200 eggs per year. The same heat resistance. The local flavor profile that Burkinabè consumers prefer. Twice the speed. Sovereign genetics. Zero dependency on French or Belgian hatcheries. And citizens are already scaling this technology to stunning heights. One man who started with 15 hens as a high school student in 1996 now operates a facility with 30,000 laying hens producing 20,000 chicks every single week. 20,000 chicks every week from a citizen who started with 15 birds 30 years ago. This is the compound effect of sovereignty applied to protein. And yet the protein revolution does not stop at cattle and chickens, because Burkina Faso, a completely landlocked nation with no coastline, no sea access, no natural fishing grounds, is now farming fish. In the desert, the government looked at its man-made hydroelectric reservoirs and saw something that nobody had thought to see before: floating fish farms. They dropped over 180 massive floating cages directly into the deep water of reservoirs like the Samandeni Dam. Inside those cages, tilapia and other species are being raised, fed, and harvested at scale. The surface of these reservoirs literally boils during feeding time, as thousands of fish respond violently to feed being hurled into the nets from above. The target: 54,000 tons of fish annually. To supply that operation without dependency on imported feed, the government commissioned 2 brand-new multi-million-dollar state-owned fish feed factories. The entire chain, from the water, to the feed, to the cage, to the processing table, owned and operated by Burkinabè entities. A landlocked desert nation with a fish industry. This is what happens when a government stops accepting geographical limitations as permanent conditions and starts treating them as engineering problems. Step back and look at what has just happened in Burkina Faso's protein sector in less than 3 years. A country that owns 71 million animals but processes 2% of their milk is now running a decentralized sovereign dairy network processing fresh milk in every major pastoral basin. 710 pregnant Brazilian cows have landed, calved, and begun injecting over 1.2 million liters of high-quality milk into that network annually. Their calves are growing up as the first generation of a new sovereign Burkinabè dairy breed, heat-resistant, high-yield, owned by the state, multiplying on national soil. The French and Belgian broiler chick imports that cost over $1 million per year have been banned. The Poulet Faso, engineered entirely within Burkina Faso, is replacing them with a bird that reaches market weight in 10 weeks and produces 200 eggs per year. 180 floating fish cages are operating in Sahelian desert reservoirs, targeting 54,000 tons of annual fish production, fed by 2 domestically owned feed factories. None of this required an IMF loan. None of this required a World Bank structural adjustment program. None of this required French agricultural expertise or Belgian genetics or Dutch dairy technology. It required a government that was willing to look at its own resources, 71 million animals on its own land, and ask a different question from every government before it. Not how do we afford to import what we need, but how do we build what we already have into what we need? The answer was Brazil. Not because Brazil is far away and exotic, but because Brazil solved the exact same tropical livestock problem decades ago, and the genetics that came out of that solution are exactly what the Sahel needed. Traoré found the solution. He bought it with Burkinabè gold. He brought it home on a plane, and now it is calving on Burkinabè soil and producing milk for Burkinabè children. That is not foreign dependency. That is sovereign procurement. There is a difference, and understanding that difference is the key to understanding everything Ibrahim Traoré is building. He is not closing Burkina Faso off from the world. He is choosing what enters on Burkina Faso's terms. For Burkina Faso's benefit, under Burkina Faso's control. 710 cows. That is all it took to begin reversing $50 million per year in dairy imports. Imagine what the next 710 will do. Imagine what the next generation of Poulet Faso birds will do. Imagine what 54,000 tons of desert fish will do. This is the protein revolution, and it is only beginning. This is Arisen Now.